Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about people making a difference to improve their community and help save the earth with my guest, Jon Biemer. He is a principal of the firm Creating Sustainability, which works on organizational development consultations. He was formerly a program manager in energy efficiency with the Bonneville Power Administration. He's registered as a professional mechanical engineer in the state of California, is a member of the Society of Environmental Journalists and of the Oregon Organization Development Network. He has written 2 books. One is Our Environmental Handprints, Recover the Land, Reverse Global Warming, Reclaim the Future. And his most recent book, Our Journey to Sustainability, How Everyday Heroes Make a Difference. Welcome back to Environmental Directions.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We recently talked about many of the people in your book. And because you covered stories of over 150 activists and environmentalists, we couldn't mention them all. And I doubt if we can mention them all today. But I wanted to have you back to talk about so many more people doing great work. You cover such a variety of people doing many different things. Let's begin with what you call the ordinary people. Not necessarily famous people, not necessarily activists, but are doing something in their own community. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those individuals?
Sure. One of the first people I mentioned in the book is Doug Haynes. He's a bus driver, worked for TriMet, the local bus public transit organization, for 10 years. He understands the environmental impact of having buses and that sort of thing, but he's really has his job because he needed income for his family and health insurance. And one thing about this particular story is he told me a little bit about the details of how you drive a bus. It's hard to do a right-hand turn in the correct way so you're not running up over the curb and all that. It was fun to hear the inside story of how you might call an ordinary person has to do an extraordinary job to get the work done.
You talk about Shelby Colt, who has retail sales and wool clothing, and her Icebreakers company slogan is natural, ethical, sustainable. Shouldn't every product be that way?
Yes, I agree. Some companies take that more seriously than others. Their company is based in New Zealand. The merino wool comes from New Zealand, and they actually have a whole program there of sustainable growing of sheep. And you have to focus on the whole system, not just on the animal itself. And they seem to be doing a very credible job of taking care of business in that respect. Shelby was basically a college student looking for a job, and she loved wool, but she was also inspired by that slogan that you just mentioned.
Here in Los Angeles, they are advocating that we should not only compost our yard waste, but our food waste, and that's for residential purposes. But companies need to be doing it, and you talk about commercial composting with Tracy Crawley and Lori Barnett.
Yes, so the company's called McFarland's Bark. It's a company where you can take the branch trimmings you've got, and if you're tearing down a shed or something like that, you can take the boards and so forth to them, and they will compost it. And they create a product. It's a product for sale that is used like on freeways and so forth to compost alongside the freeways. They have an industrial scale composting operation. Seems to me pretty worthwhile.
You even talk about yourself in terms of auto salvaging.
Yes. Yeah, I have a little bit of a, hands-on experience in various things, but I decided to go to Pick and Pull, which is basically, auto salvage yard, and it turns out that they know every car that's sitting there, and they can steer you to the car that has the parts that you need. And I did just that. I had a van, and they steered me to the van. I took the rear view mirror off of their van and put it on my van. And later on, I took the backup light off of their van and put it on my van. This is at a different time. And they're doing this at a given day. They may have 100 people doing change-out kinds of things like I was doing. And, how better to keep things rolling rather than immediately go right to the recycling process. And by the way, after the car sits in their yard for 6 weeks or so, it does get recycled. So this is part of the business process of an organization called Radius Recycling. I like to be part of that business process.
I think it's important not just to recycle, but first to reuse. The slogan, the 3 R's: reduce, we should use less, then reuse what we have, and then recycle rather than putting things in the landfill. And you have Ravella Torres, who volunteers for a thrift store. It's so important that people don't trash things. I collect so many donated items that would normally be trashed that are very valuable, and take them over to an orphanage in Kenya. And I wish more people would do that and use thrift stores for both their own purchases and to give items.
Yeah, Ravella Torres is interesting. One, she's a volunteer, so her main purpose in being there was to raise money for the organization. It's a senior center in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. But they don't just take the stuff from people and put it on the shelf. They get so much clothing that they have bag sales, and people can buy a whole bag of clothes for, I don't know, whether it's $1 or $5. And then after that's done, then they move the leftover clothing on to the churches who take it to Mexico and give it to people that need the clothing down there. So there's a whole system that Ravella is part of that I think is part of the circular economy.
These are, as you say, ordinary people, but there are also major activists and environmentalists who do good work. You've talked about a few people who work with the National Geographic Society who have worked very hard to establish parks, like Michael Fay, who helped create 20 marine parks in Gabon in Africa.
Yes. He was probably an adventurer at the start of things. He was doing flyovers of Africa and that sort of thing. He met his wife in the Peace Corps. He's the kind of guy that go in the jungle for 18 months. Rated up as a scientist, he did what's called a mega transect, which is basically walk in a straight line and write down everything that you see along the way. And then that data was the data that the president of Gabon was able to use to work with his own people to create those national parks, because ultimately you have to have whatever you do acceptable to the people that are living with it.
Henri Sala is somebody else with the National Geographic Society that has chosen to work in the Pacific area. Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument was one of his important endeavors to create and save some of the areas in our oceans. He had over 36 expeditions and still doing more.
Yes. The interesting thing that caught my attention about Enric was that he was in a career that might be called the top of your profession, the top-notch oceanographic organization, and he was writing PhD papers, research papers. But what he thought he was doing, what he came to a conclusion was he was writing about the demise of these things that she was writing about because things were getting worse rather than better. And then he read a story about Michael Fay, who I just talked about, and was inspired to do something along those lines himself. In this case, he went out and formed expeditions in areas of the ocean that were still pretty nice. The name of his organization became Pristine Seas, and basically worked with the countries, these island countries, to create marine parks to protect those species. I think it's wonderful, and it's an example of how one person can influence another person.
So many influences, and it's inspiring even for longtime activists like myself to read about these individuals and what they're doing and how we might be able to help them or replicate some of their activities or get involved with other groups to do similar kinds of projects. Let's come back to the United States area where you have an entire chapter focused on what you call the indigenous country, and you have various tribal members trying to stop coal mines, trying to create hemp as a form of income, trying to deal with toxic waste and getting rid of those dangerous kinds of materials materials that are affecting people on their land, or making a national bison range so that our bison can recover and get back into the plains.
Yes, I wanted to include the indigenous people, not so much to highlight that they're fantastic any more than you or I are fantastic, but more to make sure that they're not ignored as we think about who's taking some weight for making this a better place. One story, the Wyatt tribe in California, they're a very small tribe, 500 members, that kind of thing. And there was an island off the coast of Eureka, California, that used to be the place where they held a big ceremony every year. And there was a big massacre back in the 1800s, and the island went to white people and all that thing over for the centuries. Fast forward to relatively recently, they bought 1 acre of boatyard and recovered that boatyard to brown zone kind of thing. And they raised money to do that. And that led the city of Eureka to give the rest of the island, most of the rest of the island, to the tribe. So I see this as one of those places where we actually are responding to the sins of our past, shall we say. The other one that I mentioned is the Cheyenne, Northern Cheyenne. They had plans to do this great solar array, several hundred acres of solar systems, but they would only make 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And they realized that they're paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour for their electricity. So they decided instead of doing that big array, they were going to use that same money and put it on 80 houses, mostly for the elders, so that people could actually be saving the money directly rather than hope for a little bit of a piece of the action from something that was being exported elsewhere. That whole process was started by trying to overcome the coal mining plans that were planned right next door to the reservation. So one story leads to the next.
While you focused on sustainable projects, programs, endeavors, and we certainly need that to have our lives be more ecological, my life has been really dedicated to focusing on saving our wild ecosystems, our lands, for both humans to have someplace where humans haven't impacted seriously the land, and for the wildlife, which needs a home. So I've been very active in trying to save wildlife of different species, whether or not it's the orangutan or the wild horses or wolves or cheetahs or mountain lions, to native plants, and creating more parks and wild areas and wilderness. And it seems to me you could have a whole book of all the great people and organizations that have saved unique ecosystems. Here in Southern California, we've got the Santa Monica Mountains, we've got Bolsa Chica wetlands, Bayona wetlands, all sorts of deserts, Mojave Desert, so many different areas that people are still trying to save, still trying to create more protections for. Was there an individual or group that really stood out to you that was saving some wild areas?
I have to say I did not focus on the wild areas too much. As you were telling me the story of Alyssa Warren Wood, who actually saved a county park. It was going to be turned into a RV park, cutting down like 300 and some trees. She led a 3-year activist effort. 100 people were involved. I helped testify at one of the hearings. I have a sense that almost every park you can mention, including everyone you just did mention, have heroes associated with them. And my son actually said, "John, you need a park named after you." And I said, "Well, isn't that a little egotistical?" He said, "No, you need to focus on some park to do that."
That is what it takes. One individual who really leads a group of other people, who is dedicated to that one place in his or her backyard or her area.
Right. If you live near it, you know it best.
You have so many great stories, and I want to touch upon more of these people and what they're doing that you have mentioned in your book, Our Journey to Sustainability, How Everyday Heroes Make a Difference, when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Jon Biemer, author of Our Journey to Sustainability, How Everyday Heroes Make a Difference. We've talked about a few of the 150 individuals that you have mentioned in your book and what they've done. Let's cover a few more. You do mention some very famous people like Donella Meadows or Sylvia Earle or Jane Goodall, and you have them in different categories. How did you divide the stories into the different chapters? Was it based on their motivation or what they accomplished?
There are basically two patterns in the book. The one that you mentioned had to do with what is their basic main interest, if you will. So youth is put in a category by itself. Explorers are put in a category by themselves. People who have a religious emphasis in their life are put into a chapter. The second theme is I focused on place, the specific places that I happen to be in, where I wanted to kind of show that sustainability is not a thing that's only done in Portland, Oregon, where everybody's liberal. It's done all around the country.
When I recently had you on the program to tell us some of the stories of your everyday heroes, you really focused on what you call the 3 C's of sustainability. What are they?
Caring, catalyst, and collaboration. Before we do something worthwhile, we sort of need to care about it. Otherwise, we're just doing a pro forma job. So any of those people that I talk about who are doing what we might call ordinary work, they care about something. It may not be the environment, but they're doing a service. The catalyst is what actually gets you started making a difference, if you will. In case of John Francis, it was oil tankers causing oil spill. Usually, the people have more than one catalyst that gets them going. But after people try to do something, they usually need help, especially the youth. The youth are highly motivated, but they need somebody to show them some of the ways of getting things done and to stand behind them when they say, we got to do something. The collaboration, I think, is really important, and the collaboration is simple as buying organic food to support organic farmers.
You have covered some smaller kinds of projects, but as we know, think globally, act locally, and so you have one individual who pushed for plant-based school lunches, or you have those homeowners who want to install solar or energy-efficient designs in their homes, or use electric bikes or electric cars, or have other kinds of resources in their daily life personally, or in their work life, or in their school life. Mm-hmm. Does any particular individual stand out to you from your chapters 2, 3, 4, 5?
Mark Dixon is interesting. He was a tech person from Silicon Valley, California area. He kind of had this sense of, we need to do something better than just make better computers. And he went on a road trip across the country making a movie of all the people that are doing great things, sort of like I made a book about all the people doing great things. So he called that Your Environmental Road Trip. But when he got to Pittsburgh, where he made his home with his wife, he decided to go to make an all-electric home out of an ordinary home that was just any other home in Pittsburgh. And so there's a whole process of going from gas water heater to electric water heater, gas heating to heat pump heating. And he did it in a way that doesn't break the bank. Basically, when there was a need, he went to the eco-friendly version of the service he needed. And I think he's a good model for how you don't necessarily have to spend your whole bank account on things. You just need to be considering every time you make a decision, what's the environmental aspect of that?
Recently, I went to a movie screening about a man called the Planet Walker. You actually talked about him in your book, where he decided to walk across the country, not use any transportation, and not speak for 17 years. He was a charming man, and he eventually got his college degree without speaking, but then started talking and teaching. How can we learn from people who take those kinds of individual actions?
First thing that comes to mind is walk your talk. And I say that figuratively as well as literally. We all have values. Most of the people listening to this program probably care about the environment. It's about taking those values seriously enough to actually do something about it. So John Francis decided he was going to stop driving because he was part of the problem. And by the way, the problem that he witnessed was 2 ocean tankers colliding into each other and causing a giant oil spill. When people argued with him and saying, this is dumb, you can't make a difference just by walking, he stopped arguing with them and stopped talking for a while. It was kind of a vow of silence, kind of religious. religious, except he didn't do it for religious reasons. He did it for environmental reasons. And it turned out his silence actually was his speech, if you will. He was able to make a bigger point by explaining things with his hands and gaining those degrees and that sort of thing, rather than getting up in front of a pulpit and making a speech.
And as a black man, it was rather special and unique, and I think it shows that regardless of one's race, ethnicity, ethnic heritage, age, talents, everybody can be involved, because you have a whole chapter about youth, and I know I started my activism in high school, and I hope that more students will do so. And even though I'm not an artist in terms of painting or sculpture, I am a dancer, and I try to show how ethnic dance reflects the environment. And you mention a lot of artists, even famous ones like Ansel Adams, who took unique pictures of Yosemite, and painters like Audubon, who painted beautiful birds. You have people who wrote books for children, for adults, even puppeteers like Kermit the Frog. He says it's not easy being green. Well, he's green because of the color that they made him, but I'm green because I want the planet to be green and healthy.
There's more than one way to join the club.
You are a journalist. You talk about others doing environmental reporting. I know that this program is the longest running environmental broadcast radio show in the country, but I'm glad other people have decided to do their podcasts, to do their videos, to show the world what's going on. And one of the most famous, of course, is David Attenborough. You talk about him. I can't mention all the people that you have, so I encourage everybody to read about these 150 people in your book, Our Journey to Sustainability, How Everyday Heroes Make a Difference. I enjoyed your previous book back in 2021, Our Environmental Handprints, Recover the Land, Reverse Global Warming, Reclaim the Future. Are you interviewing another 150 for the next book? Do you want to give us any advance on who you have chosen to feature?
I'm kind of following my nose. I'm looking for situations that are worthy of note. I don't know whether it's going to turn into a book or not. So we'll see what ends up happening down the road.
Last time I asked you what was one of the most surprising stories you learned about and shared. I'm sure every single one was surprising in some way, because you met individuals, found out more, and discovered many aspects of what can be done to save our earth and to help our communities. Was there another person that you really didn't expect to learn about that surprised you in what she or he was doing?
I'm going to say not so much surprised me in the person so much as in the topic. Frederick Steinman, he's German, and he has a company called Green Boats. I found out about him just by discovering that there's a whole lot of fiberglass in the ocean waters, and it's becoming a pollution problem. And he's figuring out ways of making boats with composite materials to avoid that. It's just a whole realm of sustainability I had not even noticed. I don't say at the other end of that spectrum, geothermal power. As an engineer, I've known about geothermal power for most of my life, but Carlos Araki is figuring out a new way of drilling for geothermal where you can do it anywhere if you can go deep enough. And he's coming up with the drilling techniques to do that. I think this is a game changer, because we can turn old coal plants into geothermal plants and cut that environmental footprint by a huge amount.
You've lived in Oregon and New Mexico, different kinds of environments, but the issues seem to be the same no matter where you are in the country.
Taking care of the land is all of our jobs. The land may look different, but it's still nature, and there's ecosystems that get disrupted when human beings get involved. So either saving those places or bringing them back, recovering brownfields and that sort of thing. There's people that go to vacant lots in cities and make them gardens and things like that.
I think it's important that people be activists, but as a pantheist, I advocate getting out in nature and appreciating the natural world. And you do mention in, I think it's chapter 18, a number of guidebook writers. Oregon Desert Guide, 70 Hikes, the Rio Grande Trail in New Mexico, the Pumpkin Vine Nature Trail. I think that's in Indiana.
Yeah.
You've got a Pennsylvania Trail, the Ernst Trail, the French Creek recreation trails. There are trails practically everywhere. We need more trails. We need to maintain them. We need to go out and enjoy them. Did you join any of these individuals on one of their hikes in one of their areas?
We're talking, many of those trails are what we call rails to trails, which are old railroad alignments that were made into trails. And by the way, it's a huge amount of effort to do that. So I didn't hike with other people so much on those trails as go on my own. What I found is that the one between Meadville and Conneaut Lake, it's called Aaron's Trail. You can use it for training if you're preparing to do something like I'd like to climb a big mountain next year. And you can use it for getting in contact with nature. I think these trails are just great for just connecting the community with nature.
And if you can't get out into the natural world, it's possible to see some wildlife in the zoos, in the aquariums, in the botanical gardens. You mentioned one very famous botanical garden in the Phipps Conservatory. And most of these places are trying to save endangered species and also help the species in the wild with their conservation efforts.
That's true. That's true. The Phipps focus on plants from elsewhere. Like they have a whole exhibit on Hawaii, which may sound incongruous with Pittsburgh, where the conservatory is. But what they're doing is raising people's consciousness of plants all around the world. And I think that's important to keep track of the fact we're not just trying to save our backyard. We're trying to save the world. You can't just focus on one without the other, or should I say you need to focus on both. And I think the Phipps does a good job of bringing the attention of what's going on around the world to that. And besides that, they made this wonderful building that's super efficient and is an example of good building practices in its own right.
That's an important point, that people can go and see how a facility can be sustainable. They used a recovered brownfield site. They are LEED platinum. They have rainwater supplied irrigation. They use photo control light fixtures, heat recovery ventilation, solar collectors, and the list goes on.
I'm happy to see that you're talking about the details a little bit, because part of what I wanted to do with this book is kind of gate the subtleties of what it takes to be sustainable. It's one thing to say, oh, I want to have a LEED building. It's another thing to actually make it happen, and what are the details. And a lot of the people in this book are the people that actually make it happen. And I'm hoping that some of your listeners will get involved in something they care about and sort of work the details out, because no matter what the legislation is going on, what the big businesses are doing, the details are where it actually happens and where we actually get the benefits in the long run.
How do people get the book? How do they contact you? What is your website?
The book is available from online booksellers. Look up my name and the book. My name is Jon, Jon Biemer, Biemer. The book is Our Journey to Sustainability, How Everyday Heroes Make a Difference. My website is jonbiemer.com, www.jonbiemer.com. My email is also johnbiemer@gmail.com.
Could you share another story with us?
I want to share something from my alma mater, Arizona State University. I went there for my bachelor's and master's degree, and they didn't even have anything related to sustainability when I went there, but they've actually got whole programs in sustainability, like 25-degree specialties that relate to sustainability. I want to say that we have made huge progress in getting people educated around what you can do relating to sustainability. So there's a whole generation of youth that have the capacity to make a difference. They need support. It makes a huge difference. The one project with Arizona State University that I think is really neat, the professor came up with this idea of putting fibers in concrete. Those fibers make it so strong that you don't need rebar. And rebar is those iron rods that go in railroads. They can make light rail for cities much cheaper because of that. And that's all because somebody at the university took some initiative and then got the students involved, and now they got the city involved. And I think that's just one of those amazing stories, how you gradually create something that's small at the start end, an idea, and gradually it's going to become a way of life.
Great stories. Thank you. I'm so pleased that you have written these stories. The book is easy to read because each story is maybe only 2 or 3 pages. You don't read it from cover to cover. You can jump around, read whatever motivates you at the time. It's incredibly inspiring. I want to thank you so very much for being my guest again to talk about more of the people that you have written about. Thank you for being my guest.
It's an honor.
I have been speaking with Jon Biemer, who is a principal with Creating Sustainability and is author of Our Journey to Sustainability, How Everyday Heroes Make a Difference. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.